This bill provides for 6 months limitation for infancy, insanity, or imprisonment, for no limitation applicable, and for other offenses.
And the First Amendment that's going to be on second consideration. We are on second consideration. The First Amendment is going to be Amendment 697. Representative Mertz, 697. Amendment 697, please read us the summary of the amendment.
Amendment A 00697 provides a 2-year window in which civil lawsuits alleging childhood sexual abuse may be filed in court despite any otherwise applicable statute of limitations defense.
Representative Tom Mert on the amendment.
Mr. Speaker, Amendment 00697 is a classic 2-year window in which civil lawsuits alleging childhood sexual abuse may be filed in court despite any otherwise applicable state of limitations defense. I would remind everyone that this is one of the recommendations from every grand jury report that has manifested itself in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
All those in favor of the amendment will vote aye. Those opposed, nay. Members will proceed to vote. Representative Rossi, you are recognized. You are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We've been working hard at this issue for many, many years, members. Okay? And respectfully, Tom Mertz's amendment is a good amendment, but I'm asking you to vote no because we have my amendment, which takes care of the whole package here. We've been working hard with Majority Leader Dave Reed and myself on this amendment, and this is what is best for the victims of our Commonwealth. So I'm asking you to vote no on this amendment and stick with victims so we can get this done once and for all. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
All those in favor will be voting aye. Those opposed, nay. Members will proceed to vote. The clerk will record the vote. The nays are 183, the yeas are 11. The amendment fails. Tom Mert, you have Amendment 698. Do you wish to offer that amendment?
Negative, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to withdraw that amendment, please.
That amendment is withdrawn. Representative Todd Stevens has Amendment 9121. That is ruled out of order. It's a penalty amendment. It is not germane with respect to the underlying bill. That amendment is ruled out of order. Does anybody want to make any motions with respect to the ruling on 9121? Representative Tom Mert offers Amendment 9131. Representative Mert.
Mr. Speaker, I would respectfully withdraw this amendment as well.
And Representative Mert offers Amendment 9133.
Again, Mr. Speaker, I would respectfully request that this amendment be withdrawn.
Representative Tom Mert offers Amendment 9141. That is ruled out of order. It's not being germane. Does anybody wish to ask or have any motion with respect to the ruling on 9141? Okay, the next amendments are, and then we'll get to Representative Razi's amendment. There are 3 late filed amendments, Amendment 9238, 9239, and 9240 by Representative Petrarca. Those are ruled out of order as late filed unless he wishes to move to suspend. Then we'd have to have a vote on suspension. Go ahead, Representative Petrarca, on the amendments. And I think one has been refiled as 9351, if you could tell me which one of those is. But all of them are late filed. Representative Petrarca?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Point of order.
Yes.
I had filed 4 amendments, 2 of which I plan to withdraw. The other 2 would amend this bill as amended if the Razi amendment were to be adopted. Could my amendments be held until after that amendment is voted on, the Razi amendment is voted on?
Well, just tell me which ones are being withdrawn right now.
9238 and 9240.
Okay, and then is 9239 the one that you refiled?
(9351) is the refile of 9238.
Well, they're ruled out of order. If you want to, I mean, we can take a motion to suspend if you want to move to suspend them now. 9239 is ruled out of order because it's a late file.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to move to suspend the rules after the Razi amendment is voted on if it passes.
Okay. I'll take that up with the parliamentarian. Right now, 9238 is out of order, 9240 is out of order, 9239 is out of order, and 9351 is out of order. We have 2 remaining amendments. Oh no, there's 3 from Representative Coors. They are late filed. What are the numbers for those, please? Amendments 9270, 9357, and 9358 are all late filed. They are ruled out of order. Representative Coors?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, these late filed amendments would retroactively open the statute of limitations in other areas of law, both in tort law, contract law, and in other areas of law. I filed these amendments not so much for their consideration by the House, but to raise the point that if we think truly that the government has the power to retroactively strip citizens of a vested right in the statute of limitations in the area of sexual assault, then we necessarily have that right in other areas of law. And it raises the question about the power of government, and is anyone truly free from the reach of government? So that if a person is involved in an automobile accident in a personal injury matter and has a 2-year statute of limitations to bring a civil suit, after that statute of limitations period has expired, do the citizens of the Commonwealth who might otherwise be defendants in those cases forever wring their hands thinking that they may be exposed to litigation? Does the business who may have committed breach of contract forever have to carry on their books in perpetuity a contingent liability because government may choose to reopen the statute of limitations after that has expired? So I recognize, Mr. Speaker, that the amendments have been late filed. I filed them to raise those questions, and I respect the ruling of the chair, and they are withdrawn. Thank you, sir.
Amendments 9270, 9357, and 9358 are withdrawn. Representative Razi offers amendment 9168. The clerk will read a summary of the amendment.
Amendment A 09168 provides a 2-year window and makes other changes.
Can you please summarize the other changes?
1, establishes a 2-year window in which civil lawsuits alleging child sexual abuse may be filed in court despite any otherwise applicable statute of limitations defense. 2, increases the standard of conduct for the waivers of sovereign and governmental immunity from regular negligence to gross negligence. 3, retains the current caps on damages for lawsuits brought pursuant to a waiver or sovereign of governmental immunity. And 4, removes the statement of legislative intent.
On the amendment, Representative Rossi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, members, for sticking with me on this and doing the right thing here today. For so many years in this Commonwealth, adults in position of power have looked the other way, and our children have continually been sexually abused. Today, we as a body have an opportunity to vote on something that is historic. After we make this vote today, these statutes should never have to be changed again. We will go from in the middle of protecting kids in the United States to the top. We will be the very best. Predators are on notice. Not here in Pennsylvania anymore. Not to our children here anymore. We have victims that have come here today to watch us put up these votes. They're up here in the gallery right now. Stand up. When I first entered this legislature, as I probably said before, I thought this was about me. And when I started telling my story publicly and had over 40 boys from my parochial school reach out and say that, yes, Father Graff or Father Shigo also sexually abused them. And then I started hearing from all of your districts. My phone was lighting up from all your districts with victims asking for justice. Today, we have this great opportunity in front of us to protect our children. Today, it's about them up there. It's about giving them the opportunity to get justice, to heal, to move forward. This isn't a hard vote. It isn't. Ask yourself one question. Do you stand with victims? Or do you stand with pedophiles or the institutions that protect those pedophiles? When we put up that vote today, not only is Pennsylvanians watching what we're doing, but the world is watching what we're doing. Are we going to make this right? The grand jurors said it themselves. Give those 2 years back to these victims. Think about that. Give those 2 years back. Put yourself in any child's position. Put yourself in my position. 13 years old, getting raped in a shower by Father Graff. You think I'm thinking about what a statute of limitations is? And then only finding I had 5 years criminally to come forward and 2 years civilly? Legislators have failed in the past. Today, we make this right. Victims have waited long enough. Let's vote this.
Representative Gene DiGirolamo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And to my colleague on the other side of the aisle, this is the right thing to do. And I applaud you for your courage. I am a practicing Catholic. My faith is very, very important to me. I love my church. I went through 12 years of Catholic school. All 4 of my children went through Catholic school, grade school, and high school. And I rise today in support of the gentleman, Mr. Rossi's amendment. This is the Bible that was at my desk when we were sworn in this session. It is a St. Joseph's Edition Bible. It is a Catholic Bible. It has the Nihilo Obstat and the Imprimatur inside, which mean it complies with all the church's teachings. And I want to go to one part of this, my Bible, St. Matthew's, chapter 18. Whoever causes one of these little ones who believe in me to sin, it would be better for him to have a great millstone hung around his neck and to be drowned in the depths of the sea. St. Matthew's, chapter 18. I've got a lot of forgiveness in me. I think I do. But I'll tell you what, I have very little forgiveness for someone who would sexually, physically, or mentally abuse an innocent, precious child. How did we get to this point? As a Catholic, how did we get to this point? When the first grand jury report came out up in Boston in 2002, we read the report in horror, absolute horror. One priest being accused of sexual abuse would have been too many in my mind. And then we had the 2005 grand jury report in Philadelphia, and a second grand jury report in 2011. Horrific, despicable, you name it, appalling crimes. And the cover-up. One of the members of the clergy a short time ago told me these crimes happened 40 years ago. What are we going to do now? I don't give a damn if they happened 40 years ago or 40 minutes ago. They cry out for justice on the part of these victims. One thing to me stands out and is crystal clear from all these grand jury reports. Why didn't somebody call the police? In very rare instances, was law enforcement notified? Why didn't somebody call the police? What does it tell you? It tells me that the hierarchy of the church and some of the clergy had some kind of an agreement, a silent, secret agreement, that this is the way they were going to handle these accusations. Protect the innocent first. Never mind the safety of our precious, innocent children. Protect the institution first. And what are the words that you would come to your mind? Collusion, cover-up, enabling, sacrificing our children. And who has suffered the most, my friends? Who has suffered the most? First, the victims. It's heartbreaking. We cry out on behalf of the victims, and they deserve to have their day in court. They deserve to face their accusers no matter, again, if it was 40 years ago or 40 minutes ago, they deserve to face their accusers in court. But there are also other victims. Other victims. I think of my pastor at my church in St. Ephraim. What a wonderful, amazing man who has dedicated his whole life to the church and to his ministry. I think of our good sisters There has not one accusation been made against our sisters. We've had the sister servants of the Immaculate Heart of Mary down in the southeastern Pennsylvania. The Sisters of the Blessed Sacrament, whose mission was helping out the Native Americans and African American people in this country. And how about the faithful of the church? We've had to listen and read about these terrible accusations ourselves, so we are victims ourselves. And finally, there's been some talk about this victim compensation fund. Not now. Maybe back in 2005, if something like that was proposed, maybe that would have been accepted and worked. But it's too late. A victim's compensation fund is not going to work. We need this 2-year window. And this bill, I believe, is going to pass today. It's going to go over to the Senate, and I'm not sure if it's going to be taken up this year or not. But this window and this bill, if it doesn't pass this year, eventually is going to pass. If it doesn't pass this year, it's going to pass next year. It's time for my church to accept responsibility for their actions. It's time for healing for the church to start taking place. And the healing will not start until they accept responsibility. It might be the only way for them to accept this bill and this window. It might be the only way for the healing to begin. So, my friends, it's better to have a millstone hung around their neck and be drowned in the bottom of the ocean. I ask for an affirmative vote on this bill. Thank you.
All those in favor will vote aye. Representative Todd Stevens.
How you doing?
We don't have anybody else who's listed to be speaking. Representative Dean, the only two speakers we had were Representative Rossi and Representative DiGirolamo, but you certainly are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I think, first of all, I applaud the maker of this amendment and the work that he's done on this issue, and I was proud to support his efforts in the past, and I will continue to support his efforts in delivering justice for victims of these terrible crimes. The one reservation I do have, I hope we can correct at some point through this process. The bill, as it stands before amended, does not limit damages for liability for governmental entities. So, those children that are abused in a public school setting, I believe deserve the exact same treatment and have the exact same rights to seek justice for the atrocities that happen to them as those that may have been abused in a private school setting or with some other private organization. And I am concerned about the provisions in this amendment that go ahead and put those caps back on and limit the damages as it relates to governmental entities. I think if they committed the same atrocities that the private entities in the news right now committed, they need to be held accountable, and those victims need to be made whole as well. But I will support the amendment, and I hope that through the process we can go ahead and eliminate those caps and ensure that all the children of Pennsylvania, no matter who their abuser is or which organization is responsible for it, can be held accountable. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Representative Stevens. Representative Dean.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I stand in awe, actually, of my colleague who offers this amendment. The courage that you have shown, the tenacity you have shown on behalf of the victims you've known, those who have died unnecessarily from the torture and the torment that was theirs. I am in awe of your courage, in awe of your work. I stand with you. I, too, am a practicing Catholic, and I think practicing is an interesting word because maybe I'll never get it right. But it is time that we shine a bright light on this issue. It's beyond time. We have had the Philadelphia grand jury reports. We had the Johnstown Altoona report, and now the Pennsylvania report. So to the victims, I hope that we swiftly pass this and that the Senate swiftly passes this and that the governor swiftly, I know, will sign this to shine a light, to open the door for 2 years for the victims to come forward. A couple things stuck with me as I listened sometimes to people retell their story with such courage. And one victim said, "This act is actually a murder of the soul. How could there be a statute of limitations on the murder of a child's soul?" I share that belief. And I too believe that the way for the church to move forward is to actually make sure they address this, come to terms with it, shine a bright light on it, seek justice for these victims. If our faith doesn't teach us that, what does it teach us? Jesus said, "Let the little children come to me." With this legislation, we'll be acting in a faith-filled way to let the little children come forward and seek justice. So I stand with my colleague, Mr. Rozzi, and I applaud his courage and commitment.
Does anybody else wish to be recognized? Representative Michael Corr.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. Mr. Speaker, I commend the gentleman from Berks County for the introduction of the amendment, and I am highly sensitive to this issue. It is one that I think all of us are moved by the amendment itself and the stories that we have heard. I am equally sensitive to my oath of office that requires that we uphold the Constitution. And under Article 1, Section 11 of the Constitution, known as the Remedies Clause, I believe that the amendment that provides a retroactive application of the statute of limitations is unconstitutional. Citizens in the Commonwealth have a right to assert defenses in a court of law in civil litigation. And what this amendment would do would strip them of that right. And I simply do not believe under the Constitution that this government has the power to take away that vested right. I believe that each branch of government has an obligation, not merely a right, but a duty to express an opinion on the constitutionality of every piece of legislation that comes before it. That is why our oath of office says that we shall uphold the Constitution. Not uphold the Constitution as the courts have interpreted it, although in this case there is ample body of law to suggest that the amendment, unfortunately, is unconstitutional. But to uphold the Constitution as a separate, coordinate, co-equal branch of government, and to suggest, as has been suggested, that the constitutionality of this amendment is somehow the exclusive purview of the courts, denies the right and the duty of each of us in accordance with our solemn oath to make an independent decision as to the constitutionality of the piece of legislation. That line of reasoning necessarily suggests that the scope of the governor's veto power is limited to policy considerations only. I submit that the governor can veto a bill on grounds that it is unconstitutional, even where he agrees with the underlying policy aims, and even where the courts have given every indication that such a bill might be constitutional. A few moments ago, I reviewed some late-filed amendments that I had proposed, not with any expectation that they would be subject to a vote, but to demonstrate and raise a question. What is the limit of the power of government? These people that committed these unspeakable acts are unlikable. But I just don't believe that we have authority to take from some citizens simply because they are unlikable these rights under law that they have. And in accordance with the solemn oath that I took at the outset of this session, I am therefore unable to support the amendment as much as I would like to. And I will be voting no. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Corr, are you making a motion? And I apologize, I just wasn't,
No, Mr. Speaker, I've decided not to make the
Okay.
motion. I think that
That-
if people
I just
want to
wanted to
discuss
know.
the constitutionality of the
Correct.
amendment, they are free to do so.
yes, thank you. Representative, these are the speakers I now have. Representative Kathy Watson will be followed by Representative Pam Delicio, will be followed by Representative Frank Ryan, will be followed by Representative Brian Barbin. We'll begin with Representative Kathy Watson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I will be brief. Ladies and gentlemen, you've heard a lot today. You've been talked to in terms of constitutionality. You've been talked to in terms of your emotions. You've certainly been appealed to about the importance and the respect deserved to the victims who are watching. I would like to ask you to do something in a quiet moment and simply the way I have learned myself as chairman of the House Children and Youth Committee to do, because I had a wonderful mentor, someone back in Bucks County, who first gave me the comment, and I've thought about it, and I've used it as if it's a pair of glasses to put on every time I look at the issues. Ladies and gentlemen, this is not for the convenience of adults. It is, whatever you do is for the protection and the safety of children. If that's your prism, if that's your measure, you will be surprised how easy some decisions can be. And I would ask you to consider that, not for the convenience of adults, but for the protection and the safety of children. That would be all children, regardless of the institution. I'm not getting into any of that. I am simply suggesting a very simple way to look at issues that come before us, to look at the laws we have, and I know I will be long gone, but to continue to use that prism, and those of you who are staying, to make decisions. I think you would find we would have a better Commonwealth, and indeed it would be Commonwealth, for the good of all. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Pam Delicio waves off. Representative Frank Ryan.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much. First of all, to the distinguished gentleman from Berks County, I can't say how unbelievably sorry I am that you've been through what you've been through, and to the victims up above as well. I don't know quite how to say this or quite how to do it, but the despicability of doing anything that would abuse a child is incomprehensible to me. For those of you who don't know me, I walked across the United States 4 years ago to raise awareness of the needs of children who have emotional and behavioral problems and have been abused. But what you need to be aware of is it initially started out as a walk of atonement and as a walk of gratitude. The walk of atonement was, I said, if there's anyone in my life that I've ever hurt, I ask that they would forgive me. If there's any person that I've ever disappointed, if they would pray for me. And if there's any person I've ever helped, if they would help another. And the walk of gratitude was because I came from a very poor family. My dad died when I was very young, and I didn't have the misfortunate experiences that you did, and I can't conceivably imagine again what you've been through. And yet I saw a little boy that was in our charge who was horribly abused. He was left for dead and survived, and we took care of him. And he and I were talking, because I was chairman of the board, and I had a chance to meet with him. And I saw the spirit in his soul that came back, although horribly injured. And in it, I realized that I actually came from the wealthiest family in the United States, that we just didn't have any money. But as I saw this, what you need to be aware of is that I was an incredibly bitter person. And that walk was really designed to protect me. And I will go to the grave with what those issues are. And I'm okay with that. As that walk happened and you saw what occurred, you appreciate that until you can heal from within and through the love of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ for me in my faith, can that healing take place. And I pray, and I hope this doesn't fall on deaf ears, I pray for you every day, I really do, and for all the victims. What I don't understand is, in my lifetime, I've seen so many people hurt by government. I've seen people, and we sometimes, and I've been here 21 months, I've seen Marines die because of the ineffectiveness of government. I've seen an improvised explosive defeat task force that took decades to do while my Marines were dying in combat because of bureaucratic inertia. The problem I have with the bill, the amendment, is strictly the fact that we are exonerating us from it. Are we not held to the same standard? Do I not tell the young Marine's family when I made the casualty call to tell a 5-year-old that your father is dead? Do I not have that same right and responsibility to demand of you that we act and hold ourselves to the same standards that we should hold these priests to, and we need to? We need to make sure of all victims. Today, it's almost prophetic that the Senate is working on a version of a correction of a bill that passed here just 18 months ago. Do we have to wait that much longer? Why not hold government to the same standard? I have in my own district multitudes of teachers and family members of students who've been abused, but they are now going to be told that the victimization of you is not as important? I can't fathom that. If we find a bad bill, we decide to exempt ourselves from it? That's not the kind of leadership I was taught in the Marine Corps. What I was taught in the Marine Corps is that you set the standards, you live up to them, and they become the standards for us and others to emulate. In no way, shape, or form should those priests be let off the hook. They need to be held accountable. The victims need justice. The victims of all child pedophilia need to be held to the same standard. I remember a Good Shepherd sitting in courtrooms where a child was trafficked into prostitution by his parents for drug money, and the judge in social services turned the child back over to the parents. Really? Where are we in this process? All children deserve justice. All children deserve to be protected. All children deserve to be nurtured. We are better than that, and stop exempting us from the very laws that we are designed to fix. Let's have equal protection for all citizens, not just some. Thank you.
Representative Brian Barbin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to point out an argument made by a gentleman from Montgomery County a couple speakers ago. There is a right of the legislature to determine what remedy will be provided and under what terms. It's Article 1, Section 12 of the Pennsylvania Constitution. That's the power that gives this assembly the right to decide whether we will have a civil remedy which includes a window to help prior victims. So we have that right, And the other right that we've always had in the 335 years since this started was, we shall be governed by laws of our own making and live free. 13 words that basically said, Pennsylvania, starting with the House, because that's who was here, when they got that power from Penn, you always have the right to correct the problem. This bill corrects the problem. It's constitutional under our current provision, Article 1, Section 12, just like the environmental right was decided by the Supreme Court under Article 1, Section 27. We have these as enumerated rights. They come first in our Constitution, and they can't be overcome by other cases and other provisions that are conflicting. So I just want to add my voice. This is an appropriate legislative response to the problem. I commend the maker of the amendment. I'll be voting for the bill and the amendment.
Does anybody else wish to speak? All those in favor of the amendment will vote aye. Those opposed, nay. Members will proceed to vote. Have all the members voted? Have all the members voted? And the clerk will record the vote. The yeas are 171, the nays are 23. We'll be calling up Representative Schembel's amendment in just a minute, but the Representative Petrarca at this time, I think, has some motions with respect to Amendment 9238 and Amendment 9351. Both of these amendments are not timely filed. They would require a motion to suspend, but the clerk's going to read us Amendment 9238 first. 9238 first.
This amendment A09238, amending the bill as amended by A9168, attempts to set the level at which a government party can be sued in cases arising from childhood sexual abuse at regular negligence.
Sir, please strike that. The parliamentarian has indicated on my list, 9238 was the one that the gentleman wanted to call up. That was circled, but my understanding is it's 9239. I apologize, Representative Petrarca. 9239. Please read a summary of 9239.
Amendment A09239 removes the cap on damages that can be obtained from the government entities liable for civil damages pursuant to the waivers of sovereign and governmental immunity for cases arising from childhood sexual abuse.
My understanding is the original bill had this. The amendment that we just passed put the cap back in, and Representative Petrarca's amendment would go back essentially to the way the original bill was, which does not have a cap. Representative Petrarca, you have a motion in front of us.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I do make a motion to suspend the rules to offer this amendment, which would remove caps on public or governmental entities for incidents of child sexual abuse. In the Judiciary Committee, we did a lot of work on these bills, and we voted to make an even playing field for children who are abused in a public entity and or a private entity. With the Razi Amendment, we're going to give victims their day in court. To me, it would make sense that to deny them full recovery by a cap on damages just does not make sense. We can certainly debate the grand jury report if we thought it was well done or not well done. We can certainly debate our thoughts on whether or not this is about the Catholic Church only. In my opinion, this is much bigger than the Catholic Church. I certainly feel terrible about what happened to my colleague, Representative Razi, and I feel bad for all victims. I think the Catholic Church has done a lot since the early 2000s to make amends for what has happened. However, I do think that what has happened in the past in that church is certainly terribly, terribly wrong. Again, what this amendment does, simply does, is it removes the caps for public or governmental entities and puts everyone on the same playing field, exactly what Representative Stevens talked about a few moments earlier and exactly what we did in the House Judiciary Committee earlier this year. I ask you for an affirmative vote to suspend the rules.
All those in favor of the motion to suspend the rules, Representative Razi, on the motion to suspend.
Just want to let the members know that I'm opposed to this amendment, so I'm asking for a no vote to suspend the rules. Thank you.
All those in favor of the motion to suspend the rules for Amendment 9239 will vote aye. Those opposed, nay. Members will proceed to vote. Have all the members voted? Have all the members voted? Have all the members voted? And the clerk will record the vote. The nays are 147, the yeas are 47. The motion to suspend the rules does not pass. Representative Petrarca offers Amendment 9351. The clerk, Amendment 9351. Will you please read a summary of that amendment for us?
Amendment A09351 sets the level at which a governmental party can be sued in cases arising from childhood sexual abuse at regular negligence rather than gross negligence.
Again, my understanding is the original bill that was before us today would have been a regular negligence standard. The Razi amendment changed that to gross negligence with respect to governmental entities, and Representative Petrarca's amendment takes it back to regular negligence. It is a late filed amendment, so we would have to have a motion to suspend. You may proceed with your motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I do make a motion to suspend the rules to offer Amendment 9351. As I said earlier, this is, as I said earlier, also to make us in Pennsylvania have a level playing field. This relates to the standard of negligence. What we did in the House Judiciary Committee is, once again, we put everyone on an even playing field and said that if negligence, to find against a private entity or public entity, you merely need negligence, not gross negligence. The amendment, the Razi amendment that passed says to find someone for an act of child molestation in a private institution, you must merely find negligence. But if it is a public institution, it has to be gross negligence. I think that's certainly unfair, it's uneven, and as we all see what happens in the news today in some of our public institutions, in some of our schools, I see many more instances of child abuse and predatory behavior in public institutions as of late than I do in private institutions. Again, this is an amendment of equity. To me, it makes sense to have the same standard. It should not be more difficult for someone to be found negligent in a public institution than a private institution. The bottom line to me is it does not matter where a child is molested. It should be the same standard, and this makes it more difficult for those to recover in a public setting, and I ask for your affirmative vote to suspend the rules.
Representative Razi on the motion.
Members, respectfully, I want you to oppose the suspension of the rules. Oppose the suspension. Thank you.
All those in favor of suspending the rules to allow for a vote on Amendment 9351 will be voting aye. Those opposed will be voting nay. Members will proceed to vote. Have all the members voted? Have all the members voted? And the clerk will record the vote. The nays are 145, the yeas are 48. The motion to suspend does not pass. Representative Schemmel offers Amendment 9177. 9177. The clerk will read us
Amendment A 09177. Amendment A 09177 establishes the Truth and Restoration Commission to address past child sexual abuse and institutional concealment of that abuse.
Representative Schemmel, the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in the recently released grand jury report, there are a couple of takeaways that I have. First, in the recommendations, the grand jury says that people need to be heard, people want their voices to be heard, they want their stories to be told. And they say, in regard to justice for past offenses, that in our American system, the only means of getting justice is to sue. Now, the grand jury were not policy makers. They're not legislators. The Attorney General is not a legislator. But we are legislators. We can think differently or more creatively about a solution than they were afforded the ability to do so. So I thought to myself, and as an attorney, I know what's involved in a lawsuit, and I thought to myself, what is in store for victims? Victims of the Catholic Church will have an easy time, as they have in other states where they have lifted the statute of limitations for a period, because there will be ample number of attorneys that circulate 1-800 numbers and offer opportunities to sue. But victims of smaller institutions, particularly institutions that do not have much in the way of assets, will be in a different boat entirely. They will be forced to actually pay their attorney to bring a lawsuit. If we think through what has brought victims to the floor in the grand jury, there have been 3 grand jury reports covering a total of 6 months. The Attorney General reports that over 50 attorneys were involved in the investigation. There was significant media coverage. The FBI assisted. That is an effort unlike any we've seen, and it's uncovered a significant amount of abuse. But when we look at the data, we see that there is abuse in other institutions as well. The 2004 report of the United States Department of Education indicated the same level of abuse, the same nature of abuse and cover-up and concealment occurs in our nation's public schools. We know from victims advocates that abuse occurs in small institutions and large. It includes in churches, in synagogues, and in youth organizations. But we see justice is very uneven when we resolve only to allow the civil courts to address this abuse. So, Mr. Speaker, that is why I propose something different. I proposed a commission that would be independent. The people, or I should say not persons, but institutions that desire to participate would cooperate fully with the work of the commission, that victims would have the ability to have their voices heard, whether those institutions that concealed their abuse were large or small, rich or poor, that those institutions would then be mandated to provide a contribution that would be financial. It would be based upon the number of victims, the nature of abuse, and the length of time that people were concealed in that abuse. That there would be a punitive element to that. And that therefore, that would encourage the not encourage, but mandate the contributions into a fund. And that therefore, victims would be compensated out of the fund, regardless of whether the institution that concealed their perpetrator was large or small, rich or poor. Mr. Speaker, I know this is a complex proposal, but it's a different proposal, and one that gets beyond the objections that we see from the Senate. If we send the Senate the same proposal we have before, we can expect to get the same outcome, which will be nothing. And once again, victims will be left with nothing. So I humbly present to you a proposal to do something different, to find some sort of solution for victims that have been crying out for so long. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Rossi on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in opposition to Amendment A9177. Mr. Speaker, this amendment only provides for the voluntary participation of organizations which we all know will never happen. These organizations have not voluntarily stepped up to take care of their victims raped by their institutions for the last 30 years. In fact, they spent their money covering up their rapes. What makes us think that they're suddenly going to do the right thing today? Furthermore, currently, if victim statutes of limitations have passed, these organizations owe them nothing. What incentives do these institutions have to come out and admit to raping kids in the past and start paying them compensation that they otherwise wouldn't do? If they wanted to do that, they could do that today. This amendment is not necessary. I oppose Amendment A09177. Mr. Speaker, let's vote it down.
Representative Frank Ryan.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much. And ladies and gentlemen, members, I stand and urge you to support this amendment. And I want to explain to you why. It goes back to a little bit about what I said earlier about the disdain that I have, despite 40-some years in the Marine Corps, for governmental processes. So let me explain to victims and to others what happens. My father-in-law, John Costa, was a retired Navy chief. He developed mesothelioma from his service in the Navy. And by the time the settlement was done after going to court, my mother-in-law ended up with half of what the original settlement was. In my work with the Archdiocese of Baltimore to help them get through this issue, and as chair of the audit committee there for a number of years afterwards, I became really convinced that the judicial system's not the best place for this, but that we need to have some degree of protection to make sure that victims' voices are in fact heard. I believe this commission does that, and the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops has already indicated that they've done this before, that they would settle because they need to. It's a day late, unfortunately, but hopefully not a dollar short. So I would ask each and every one of us to look at this amendment as a means of providing protection of the victims again, because here's what will happen. If there's a significant, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, if I could, I just can't hear. Can we have order in the, if we could?
Representative Ryan has requested some order on the floor. I think he's appropriate in asking. He is the last speaker on this particular amendment. If everybody could please take their seats.
Once you get into a
Representative
legal...
Ryan, just give everybody a moment. Just
Thanks, Mr.
members, could you please take your seats? All members, please take your seats.
It's incumbent upon everyone to hear this that's not familiar with the judicial system. I've spent an entire career keeping organizations out of bankruptcy, and I will caution you, here's what will happen. Any attorney representing anyone, in this case the Catholic Church of Diocese, not knowing what the potential liability will be, will advise them to file bankruptcy. And in that filing of the bankruptcy, it then goes to a federal court, and the claims request goes out. Unfortunately, the legal fees in a bankruptcy get paid first, and the victims that need and deserve to be compensated get taken care of last. So I would ask you, if you're not familiar at all with how bankruptcy operates, to let's, at this point, take care of victims, because that's who needs to be taken care of. and not victimize them once more. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Does anybody else wish to speak on the amendment? All those in favor of the amendment will be voting aye. Those opposed, nay. Members will proceed to vote. All those in favor? Yes. Any opposed? Nay. And the clerk will record the vote. The nays are 161, the yeas are 33. The amendment does not pass. There are no further amendments on Senate Bill 261 that I see. Will the House agree to the bill? The bill is agreed to as amended.